Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jeff. This is Not Just Book Reviews, and this week I'm going to be talking about H.P. Lovecraft. Specifically, this collection from Penguin called The Call of Cthulhu and Other Stories, which I just finished. So, my experience with H.P. Lovecraft is very limited. I'm in my early 50s now, and this is the very first time that I've done an extended, sustained read of any body of his work. I read The Outsider years ago when I was a young man. I thought it was an interesting story, but it didn't land really with me. In my 30s, I think, or 40s, I read At the Mountains of Madness, mostly because I read the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, and I knew that Mountains was kind of a response from Lovecraft to that book. So I read it, and didn't do much for me. Like I walked through it. It was very opaque and incredibly long and overly detailed, and I don't know, it didn't stick with me. Something lingered, I think, after that. I read Call of Cthulhu a few times, sporadically, maybe throughout my life, and each time I came away just thinking like, I don't know, I think something cool's there, but what I recognize with him is that the immediate experience of reading a Lovecraft story is not the point. It's not how he works. The immediate experience of reading, let's say, a Robert E. Howard story is immediate and enjoyable and visceral, and I'm there. Like his brethren, Clark Ashton Smith, the immediate reaction when I read the story, The Faults of Vaughan, was amazing. Blown away, came away from it like, oh my God. But he has a very interesting effect. It's very strange in that it's almost like, you know, he's a painter, and when he's done painting the wall, the color he put up is indeterminate, but it suggests other more interesting shades that are nowhere in existence in a way. Color out of space is kind of a classic metaphor for him. I feel like he's a very unique writer in that he's kind of a suggestive writer, where you come away from the stories initially not like, okay, I think I got that, or often confused about even what happened in the story. There are times I finish some of these stories, and because he's in some ways, he's a very precise writer, but his precision is elusive. He's like the king of precisely eluding you of what he's trying to do. And that sometimes I would go back and there would be one phrase I was like, oh, okay, you know, everyone died in that area because of that one. But beforehand, you know, like I didn't even know what had happened. So I think that's why he didn't really take with me early on. There's not an immediate connection to the text. But this time I hung in there, and largely inspired by a lot of you other booktubers who are fans. Lovecraft seems to be high up on the echelons of lots of booktubers. I started to push forward. So I want to talk about this collection. I want to talk about the things that I like. I liked 4 stories very much. 4 stories I was hit and miss with, and the rest of the bunch I didn't like. And I kind of want to use each group as an example to talk about what I did like about them and what I didn't. So I want to start with The Outsider, which was one of my favorites. And The Outsider is great. And The Outsider and Dagon, and Festival, 3 of the 4 that I really liked, are examples of brevity. Lovecraft is short. He does his Lovecraft thing. He builds up his world. He gets you in there little by little. He's sifting you through, and you're seeing shadows and hearing about things from other places. And for me, there's like a break point when I've had enough of that and something has to happen, or the story needs to now move. Something needs to shift. And the stories that succeed for me are when that happens. So in The Outsider, you get this wonderful setting of this underground necropolis, but soon after he's got to move, and so he climbs up and he's out. And then you get this wonderful setting in the graveyard, and then he moves towards the party. So, you know, things are happening. You reach kind of a point where you've described as much as you can, but then things are moving. So especially with The Outsider, most of the time Lovecraft's prose is it's very good, it's very clean, and it's suggestive rather than descriptive. And there are times it can punch through and be really passionate. And I want to read a chapter, and I want to read a passage from The Outsider, which is one of my favorites. So this passage occurs when the main character has realized now that he cannot go back to his underground depths, and he's been rejected kind of by the world, and he's having this moment of realization. Quote, "Now I ride with the mocking and friendly ghouls on the night wind, and play by day amongst the catacombs of Nephren Ka in the sealed and unknown valley of Haddoth by the Nile. I know that light is not for me, save that of the moon over the rock tombs of Neb, nor any gaiety, save the unnamed feasts of Nitocris beneath the great pyramid. Yet in my new wildness and freedom, I almost welcome the bitterness of alienage. For although Nepenthe has calmed me, I know always that I am an outsider, a stranger in this century, and among those who are still men." End quote. Wonderful. And it's a perfect example of plenty of mood and build. Something happens, and then you've got this wonderful capper on it as the character really punches through with this wonderful prose. So, big fan of The Outsider. Dagon is another of his that I really love because it's very similar in that it is short. And it's a wonderful, he throws a lot at you in a short period of time, where you have this castaway who is cast adrift and in the Pacific discovers this island which he didn't think was previously there, stumbles upon it, and then gets to this incredible valley where there's this big bowl, this temple to this god Dagon. Wonderful descriptions of all of the writings, and then of course the god rises to make an appearance, to get a sacrifice, however it works. And then the narrator turns tail and he's gone, wakes up in a hospital, which is a wonderful trope. There's a bunch of tropes that Lovecraft falls into. And one of them is the main character ending up in the hospital, either at the beginning or the very end of the story. It's very funny, actually. And this one is at the end of the story. But he throws so much at you, like you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on an uncharted island. There's this mysterious, god that we've never heard of before in the middle of it, and just the alienage and uncanniness of it all is striking. But it hits you, like James Brown, hit it and quit it, right? He gets you there, and then you're out, and you're left with these lingering images about what all this means, what is this God, what is this doing here? So just, again, wonderful story, very evocative, and doesn't overstay its welcome. The Festival is another wonderful story that does the same thing. Narrator comes home around Christmas time, but of course in the story it's called Yuletide. And immediately we realize at this time of year there are things been going on much earlier than Christianity. It is the winter solstice, right? These ancient celebrations, and so we already immediately get a sense of things being beneath the town or beneath what he's picturing us. But it's very wonderfully moody and evocative, and I'd like to read a couple of passages actually from the festival because it has some really good ones. Here's one where he's looking up at. It turns out that eventually everyone in the town kind of goes up to this church, and he's describing it. Quote, "Beside the road at its crest, a still higher summit rose, bleak and windswept, and I saw that it was a burying ground where black gravestones stuck ghoulishly through the snow like the decayed fingernails of a gigantic corpse. The printless road was very lonely, and sometimes I thought I heard a distant horrible creaking as of a gibbet in the wind. Then they had hanged 4 kinsmen of mine for witchcraft in 1692, but I did not know just where." That's wonderful. Fingernails of someone buried as tombstones. What a wonderful image. So then it turns out he's known there. He's from an ancient family that was from there, and he shows up in someone's house. Then all of a sudden, everyone kind of dons these black cloaks, heads out into the street and up towards this church. And there's a great image here. Quote, "We went out into the moonless and tortuous network of that incredibly ancient town. Went out as the lights in the curtained windows disappeared one by one, and the dog star leered at the throng of cowled, cloaked figures that poured silently from every doorway and formed monstrous processions up this street and that, past the creaking signs and antediluvian gables. the thatched roofs and diamond pane windows, threading precipitous lanes where decaying houses overlapped and crumbled together, gliding across open courts and churchyards where the bobbing lanthorns made eldritch drunken constellations. End quote. Wow. But again, this is another example of he's setting me up this amazing home for Christmas, right? This is kind of like Lovecraft's Festivus, as it were. Sets the stage, these incredibly creepy people now, they're all out. He's with them. They go to the church. And like most churches in Lovecraft stories, it's really been taken over by other gods. And down they go into the vaults beneath the church. He follows them into these crypts, and then there's this huge cavern. They all hop on these winged beasts and fly away. And that's the story. So again, I think something about it being around Christmas time gives it this extra like older than Christmas vibe that makes it very spooky for me. And he sets up enough wonderful atmosphere about the town, and then he hits it. They go down, they do their thing, and off they go. And again, the story has really great impact, and it's given me a lot to reverberate and take with me. So again, another instance of the shorter Lovecrafts that I really like. The fourth and last story that I really liked in this collection was The Call of Cthulhu, obviously, probably one of his greatest stories. And I think I liked it because he carves it up into 3 stories. So we have the first story, which was a terrifically weird idea of the notion that psychic sensitives around the globe are affected by something all at the same time. So that was a wonderful thing to come across. And then the second story, happening earlier than that, this inspector comes to kind of like a convention of the weird and tells this story about this cult out in the bayou, right? There's New Orleans. I think it's down that way somewhere. And the crazy things that happen there. And the through line through both of these stories are these sculptures of Cthulhu, which are found, these bas-reliefs and little sculptures, which are connecting all the narratives. So you've got 2 wonderful hits. And then the third one is this terrific narrative by this sailor Johansson, which is first read, then paraphrased by the narrator. And then you're out in the ocean, where they discover Rilla, or Ryla, however you pronounce it. Lovecraft aficionados, please forgive the butchering of whatever names that I choose to use here. So they discover this island, and they stumble upon it, and they open the vault, and you've been prepped for what's behind it because of the earlier stories. Out comes Cthulhu. Mayhem ensues, and then there's this glimpse of the island as they're, leaving by boat. There's actually a wonderful painting. I may pop it up here when I do some editing later, of this moment that someone did online, which is amazing. And it kind of makes me want to talk about the visualizations of Lovecraft, and I think why on very few occasions can you do justice to Lovecraft in the visual form. And I think that's purposeful. I think that the way he works is that he's so kind of suggestive. Everything about Lovecraft is suggestive. It's not concrete. So, bringing concrete, the idea of your concrete Lovecraft to a film, I think will never work. Having, if they do this, multi-billion-dollar presentation of At the Mountains of Madness, and I see a Shoggoth in all its CGI glory, it's not going to be the same. It's really not. And it makes me think of how many, Stephen King has his share of good adaptations and bad adaptations, right? In visual format. Lovecraft, they're almost all bad. And the ones that work, like Herbert West Reanimator, is kind of played for laughs, which I know people think there's humor in Lovecraft. I don't find too much of it so far. But the only one that I really think works is Dagon. I think they got Dagon completely right. Stuart Gordon killed. And it's really the shadow over Innsmouth and a little bit of Dagon sifted in. But again, it's because it's low budget, it's mostly suggestive. You're not seeing Dagon, you're just seeing hints of him. And you're getting more through other things. But I think that Lovecraft is very, very resistant to concrete visualizations of what he is describing. And I think that's just part and parcel of his style, is that he's kind of a suggestist, or a suggestivist, as it were. And everyone's version of what Cthulhu is in their mind is a little different. and the impressions you get of the elder gods, the gods of the deep, the old ones. Again, everything's impression and feeling and, suggestion. And I think it really, really defies someone taking a lens and saying, well, we got to film something. It's got to be a clean and clear image of this thing. And I think with Lovecraft, first of all, you're not going to get in any kind of budget these horrible images that you're going to have to put up on screen. No one's going to make it, right? So you have to do it on the cheap. Anyway, just a digression to kind of bolster what I think his style is about, and that, again, he really is impenetrable in some ways as a writer. Okay, so 4 stories where I don't like him, they're hit and miss with me, where they do similar things, but too much and not enough. So I'll start with Herbert West, Reanimator. I think there's 3 separate Herbert West stories in the whole bigger story. And for the most part, they're kind of dull. Everything is very suggestive about what this person is doing. And at the end of it, it's like something's happening in the town. The only thing that really stuck with me is when one of the corpses reanimates and you get the sense that the last thing he saw was Herbert West killing him, right? And that was really like, whoa, that was a cool moment when that happened. But the rest of it, Herbert West Reanimator, was really kind of this narrator not so interestingly describing what's going on and the kind of suggestions that he's trying to bring things back, and some of them coming back and knocking on the door. Who is it, honey? It's another one of your things you brought back. So I don't know the tone of it, but nothing really kind of landed with me other than that one moment. Rats in the Walls, to me, this is a classic example. Rats in the Walls, Color Out of Space, and The Shadow over Innsmouth, and somewhat Whisper in Darkness. Just tons and tons and tons of build-up and atmosphere and narrative, and they're long, and they build and build and build, and then they kind of peter out. And so I feel like for me, there's this moment with Lovecraft, again, when I hit a peak where I'm like, all right, you've got me, you've got all the illusions, the Necronomicon and the Miskatonic University and the older ones, and you're piling it on, and I'm feeling the dread. It's coming out of my skin. And it's like, now you got to pay off. But these stories, they keep going. Shadow over Innsmouth is a classic example. It was like so long. And there was very little payoff in the end. It was, again, all the moment when they all kind of come into the town was very vague. One part about it that I did like was when they talked about what happened in the Pacific. So you got a little kind of backstory that was really creepy and made me think of the Temple of Dagon out in the Pacific. So that was something that was kind of cool. But the longer forms for me, are problematic because he just builds too long, and I feel like he loses his moment. So that, it's almost like you're psyching me up so much that no matter what you eventually pay off, there's a point where I'm like, you know what? Unless it's the end of the world and the universe is coming to an end, everything else is going to be a letdown. And I feel like that's what happens with him in the longer forms. So then the remainder of the ones that I really didn't care for, there were the prose poems, Celophaeus and Nyarlathotep. I can't pronounce it. I feel like they're prose poems. They either hit you or they don't. These didn't really, you're in the mind of the dreamer. You're flying over these cities. They either work or they didn't. They kind of just didn't land with me. Statement of Randolph Carter was just goofy. You fool, Warren is dead. Like, okay, hopefully he wrote that when he was very young. The facts containing the late Arthur German and his family. He comes from apes. Like, okay, is that really scary in this day and age? Again, The Whisperer in Darkness, massive amounts of buildup. And then it's a head and a pair of hands on a chair, which was creepy and I appreciated, but just way, way, way less than anything I could have imagined that should have happened after all that buildup. And then kind of the Rogues Gallery, Cool Air, The Hound, A Picture in the House, were all just kind of larks for me. They kind of they didn't really hit. Some of them were kind of goofy. It's probably a part of it too that it's just been 100 years since these things were written, so some things are not going to land. But it's been a fascinating time walking through him. So I'm going to continue on. Penguin has got this great collection. So again, this is the one that I just read. Then they've got Dreams in the Witch House, which I'm also going to get to, and then The Thing on the Doorstep and Other Stories, which my good friend got me this wonderful same volume but a hardcover, which is kind of introduced by Guillermo del Toro. All of these are edited by Mr. Weird himself, S.T. Joshi, who's like the guy who edits all of the Weird volumes. So I'm going to make my way through those. And then I also bought this one. This is part of a 2-book series from Gallant's. The first one is all of his collected tales, which I had, so I figured it would be overkill. This one is a lot of the poetry. I think the fungi of Yagoth is in here, which I'm dying to read, and his essays and some fragments and other stuff. So this will be kind of fun too. So I think I have pretty much the full range of his work. But it's been a fascinating read. Again, I think he's very unlike any other writer that I've ever read, and it's not surprising that such a wide range of writers revere him. Like, Michel Houellebecq from France, I think, wrote an essay about Lovecraft. King obviously loves Lovecraft. Like Joyce Carol Oates edited a Lovecraft collection in the 80s or 90s. So you find that he's beloved by a lot of these writers, and I'm starting to kind of get it. But I feel like it's a very unique thing where the act of reading and ingesting his work is one that may or may not have a lot of immediate payoffs. But it's when you put the book down, what's bouncing around in your subconscious afterwards, that's where the real magic happens. And that's really, so far in my own experience as a reader. Obviously you have the impenetrable writers like Mr. Gravity's Rainbow, who I've tried to read. Guys like that, or Finnegan's Wake, where you're like, you can't even get into it. Like, it's impenetrable because it's for 1.1% of the population's brain power. But then, and then you have every other writer who ever lived, whose variations of I kind of get their stuff, or I don't like their stuff. But he's very strange in that he's laying out these narratives and you're kind of you're in and out. What is this? It kind of ends. He's suggesting the world. And then only days later do you wake up in the middle of the night, thinking of one of his worlds or one of his stories in your head. And you're like, oh, he sifts and silts into your kind of reader's consciousness in a way that's very unique. I've never experienced before. So it's kind of like a weird drug that, when you first try it, when your first time you had a beer growing up, you were like, oh, this is terrible. But it made you feel kind of interesting. So you kind of had more. So I think I'm going to keep going and do as much weird reading as I can. But I want to finish all of Lovecraft for sure. I want to get my arms around this very unique writer. So I will continue to report back as I finish the 2 subsequent collections from the Eldritch Dark, as it were. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.